Mr. Tribble, last month I asked Apple in a letter why it was building a comprehensive location database on iPhones and iPads and storing it on people's computers when they synced up, of course. Apple's reply to my letter will be added to the record. But this is what Apple CEO Steve Jobs said to the press, quote, "We build a crowdsourced database of Wi-Fi and cell tower hotspots, but those can be over 100 miles away from where you are. Those are not telling you anything about your location," end quote. Yet in a written statement issued that same week, Apple explained that this very same data will, quote, "help your iPhone rapidly and accurately calculate its location." Or as the Associated Press summarized it, the data help the phone figure out its location, Apple said. But Steve Jobs the same week said, those are not telling you anything about your location. Mr. Tribble, it doesn't appear to me that both these statements could be true at the same time. Does this data, I understand you're anticipating my question, so I'll just ask it and then you'll answer. Okay. Does this data indicate anything about your location or doesn't it?
Senator, the data that's stored in the database is the location of as many Wi-Fi hotspots and cell phone towers as we can have. That data does not actually contain in our databases any customer information at all. It's completely anonymous. It's only about the cell phone towers and the Wi-Fi hotspots. However, when a portion of that database is downloaded onto your phone also knows which hotspots and cell phone towers it can receive right now. So the combination of the database of where are those towers and hotspots, plus your phone knowing which ones it can receive right now, is how the phone figures out where it is without the GPS.
Okay, Mr. Sultana, consumers are hearing this a lot from both Apple and Google, and I think it's confusing. Because Apple basically said, yes, that file has location, but it's not your location. And when it separately came out that both iPhones and Android phones were also automatically sending certain location data to Apple and Google, they both said, yes, we're getting location, but it's not your location. Mr. Sultani, tell me, whose location is it? Is it accurate? Is it anonymous? Can it be tied back to individual users?
Thank you, Senator. I think that's a great question. So yeah, in many cases, the location that this data refers to is actually the location of your device or somewhere near it. While it's true that in some rural areas, this can be up to 100 miles away, in practice for the average customer or the average consumer, it's actually much closer, in the order of about 100 feet, according to a developer of this technology, Skyhook. If you refer to Figure 3 of my testimony, you can see an example of this location as identified by one of these Wi-Fi geolocation databases. I took my location based on GPS and my location based on the strongest nearby Wi-Fi signal in the Senate lobby, just out here. And the dot on the left refers to my location as determined by exact GPS, and then the dot on the right determines my location based on this Wi-Fi geolocation technology, and it was about 20 feet from where I was sitting on the bench. So, depending on how you want to slice it, I would consider that my location. The files in these databases also contain timestamps that describe at what point I encountered some of these Wi-Fi access points, so they could be used to trace a kind of a trail about you. And then finally, to the degree that this data contains identifiers that's sent back, so IP addresses. We heard earlier that the gentleman from the DOJ, he was claiming that IP addresses are necessary to identify consumers or criminals. To the degree that those IP addresses are used to identify criminals, they become identifiable, and it's really difficult to call this stuff anonymous. Making those claims, I think, is not really sincere.
Well, because basically, if you have, I mean, this location, like in your illustration, you see that you're in the Hart Building.
Or near the
Or-
entrance of the
Yeah,
Hart
yeah.
Building.
And so, let me ask Mr. Brookman the same question I asked Mr. Weinstein. My wireless company, companies like Apple and Google and the mobile apps I have on my phone all can and do get my location or something very close to it. And my understanding, Mr. Brookman, is that in a variety of cases under current law, each of those entities may be free to disclose my location to almost anyone they want to without my knowing it and without my consent. Is that right? And if so, exactly, how exactly can they do this?
I think that is correct. So, like, as I mentioned before, the default law in this country for sharing of data is you can do whatever you want, right? The only thing you can't do is what you have previously promised not to do with that data. So if someone like Apple or Google said, hey, if you give this location data to Google Maps, we promise not to share it with an advertising partner. Under that scenario, they would be prohibited under the FTC Act from sharing it. Otherwise, I think for the most players in this space, I think it would be very hard to make a legal argument that they're required to have the affirmative requirement not to share data.
Thank you. Mr. Davidson, Mr. Tribble, let me ask you one last question because my time is running out. Your two companies run the biggest app markets in the world, and both of your companies say you care deeply about privacy. And yet, neither of your stores requires that apps have a privacy policy. Would your companies be willing to commit to requiring apps in your stores to have a clear, understandable privacy policy? This would by no means fix everything, but it would be a simple first step and would show your commitment on this issue. Mr. Davidson?
Thanks. It's a great question. I would be happy to take it back. I think is an extremely important issue that you raise about application privacy. At Google, we have tried to maximize the openness of our platform to allow lots of different small businesses to develop applications. We have relied on a permissions-based model at Google so that before an application could get access to information, they have to ask permission from the user. You're asking about the next step, which is whether we put affirmative requirements on applications. And I would just say I will take that issue back to our leadership. I think it's a very good suggestion for us to think about.
Mr. Tribble?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. What we do currently is we require contractually third-party app developers to provide clear and complete notice if they're going to do anything with the user's information or device information. So if you want to become an Apple developer and put an app in the App Store, you sign an agreement with Apple that says you're going to do that. Now, it doesn't specifically require a privacy policy, but what I'll say is that probably a privacy policy in this general area is not enough. And I agree with the earlier panel that what we need to do, because people may not read a privacy policy, is put things in the user interface that make it clear to people what is happening with their information. And Apple thinks this way. For example, when an app is using your location data, we put a little purple icon right up next to the battery to let the user know that. Now, we say that in the privacy policy too, and the app should say that too, but we also put something in the user interface to make it even more clear to the user. We also have an arrow that shows if an app's used your location in the last 24 hours. So transparency here goes beyond just what's in the privacy policy. It's designing into the app and the system itself information, feedback to the user about what's happening with their information.
Okay, thank you. Just one yes or no, Mr. Soltani. Isn't it true that there is no mechanism for iPhones to notify users that their apps can disclose their information to whomever they want. Okay, thank you.
It's true.
Mr. Tribble, when you download an app on Android or on an Android machine, if it tells you that if that app will access your location, your calendar, your contact list, and you get a chance, right, to opt out of those. But an iPhone only asks you if you want to share your location, your location with an app, nothing else. Don't you think it would be helpful for Apple to inform consumers if an app will be able to get information from their calendars or address books? What more can Apple do to inform consumers of the information that an app can access, do you think?
Well, in the case of those things that, the app, we encourage, as I mentioned, and even require the app provider themselves to give notice and get consent from the consumer before they do that. Different from Google in those cases, we do not provide or attempt to provide technical means in all cases to prevent the app from getting at any and all information. In fact, we think that would be very difficult. However, specifically in the case of location, we do make sure that every single time an application, or for the first time an application asks to get access to that user's location, it pops up that dialog box that says, this app would like to use your location, yes or no. So I would say that our two things there. One is our priority in this case has been on the especially sensitive nature of location and to provide technical measures or attempt to on the phone to provide that notice every single time when the app first asks. In the case of other information, which may also be personal information, but maybe not, to the same extent as where am I right now, we require the app to give notice and to get consent from the user, but we do not have a technical means to require that. And if we, it's not that we wouldn't want to, we think that's difficult, and it's especially difficult because when you start to do that for every little piece of information, the screen that the user is confronted with in terms of yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, potentially becomes very long and complex.
Well, Google has a screen that contains the number of those, and it seems to work for you guys, right?
It works for us guys, yes.
Okay. Ms. Tribble, well, the ranking member asked you how your companies enforce your own rules for apps. When you were in my office yesterday, and thank you for coming, I actually asked you this question. How many apps have you removed from your app store because they shared information with third parties without users' consent?
As I mentioned to Senator Coburn, of course, our first defense is to not put them there in the first place, but if we find an app, we investigate, we work with the developer to get them to give proper notice, and we tell them at some point, if we find them violating, you're going to be off in 24 hours. In fact, I think all of the applications to date, or the application vendors to date, have fixed their applications rather than get yanked from the App Store
So
in those cases.
the answer to my question is zero?
Zero.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Soltani, let me ask you a different question. Of all the things you've seen, what is the most serious privacy threat that mobile devices pose today?
Sir, thank you for your question. I think the biggest takeaway from this is that consumers are repeatedly surprised by the information that apps and platforms are accessing. Consumers are entrusting their computers and and phones and other devices with a great deal of personal information. And then to the degree that these platforms are not taking adequate steps to make this clear to consumers, that others in the pipeline have access to this information, I think that's a problem. We've talked about the apps where, a certain app might need access to, I think the example was it needed access to your location information. You said, no, I don't think consumers would know whether apps would need access to certain types of information or not, or could make those definitions clear. And the kind of stemming from that, we see it sounds like the providers of these platforms are actually surprised as well that they're collecting information. In the case of Street View, they were surprised that they were collecting the Wi-Fi information, and in the case of the recent Apple episode, they were surprised that even a year ago they responded to this issue that they were collecting information for a year. And so I think we need improved transparency on this stuff, and in order to do that, we need clear definitions of what things like opt-in mean. For example, the checkbox being checked by default, and you have to uncheck that. Is that really kind of opt-in or is that opt-out? Clear definitions
Sounds
on
like
whether,
opt-out to me, yeah.
right. Clear definitions of what location is. Like if it's if it gets you within 20 feet, is that your location? And then most importantly, clear definitions of what third parties and first parties mean in this context.
Well, could you describe the results of the Wall Street Journal's investigation into mobile apps? Specifically, can you describe the information that apps are getting from users and sharing with third parties? And you tell us, you said they were surprised if the average user has any idea that this is happening.
Right. So I don't think most consumers would know that apps would access things like your location information or information stored on your device.
So your address book?
Your address book, your contacts.
Contact
I think there was a
information.
case where Facebook, you would install the Facebook app, and it would synchronize your entire address book up to Facebook's server. I think people were kind of surprised by that functionality. I don't think people realize what the data that's held on the phone versus the data that's transmitted to websites, and then even more transmitted to downstream ad companies and other entities that are not even the website that builds the app. And I think ultimately this might be an issue with regards to kind of the incentives are mixed. So in this context, we have Apple and Google as platform providers, but they're also advertisers, and they also make apps. And so in the example earlier where it was the truck driving and making fraud or problematic products, I think in this case we have the same companies that are the truck and the product, and it's really weird to figure out what the incentives should be for them to kind of do the right thing and make intelligent defaults. I think we've seen the defaults fall in the favor of what is in their best interest. Obviously so, they're companies, right? They're commercial entities.
Well, thank you, Mr. Soltani, and thank you all.